Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods. No grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, checking in on the folks at Abbott, getting an update on the FreeStyle Libre. Tim Dunn is their principal clinical research manager, and he's been working on this technology for 2 decades.
I started working on continuous glucose monitors in 1997, so I've been at this a while, and it's really been amazing to see how things have evolved over the past 2 decades, but a lot of pieces have to come together to make it work.
We'll talk about a new study that shows how often people scan their Libre flash glucose monitor, what that means for their health, and what's next for the technology. In our Community Connections segment, how a college dining hall manager stepped up to make changes for students with diabetes after a pretty boring meeting with doctors.
And that's when I knew that this wasn't a group that needed to necessarily be run through student health, but this is something more social that I wanted to make sure that people on a community level and on a social level could meet and get together and talk about things and not just hear from a doctor or a dietitian's perspective what they should or shouldn't be doing.
And know better this week, a new standalone CGM from Medtronic. What does that mean? We'll take a look. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. Thrilled to have you along. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection from movers and shakers in our community, famous people, everyday people, healthcare companies like you're going to hear today, tech folks, and that sort of thing. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2, 11 plus years ago. My husband has type 2, and my background is in broadcasting, local radio and TV news, that sort of thing, and that's how you get the podcast. So for the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about events and not knowing, because of the weather, it's been crazy, where I'm going to be. So looking back, just to recap quickly, I did get to go to the JDRF Type 1 Nation Summit in Greensboro, North Carolina. I did not get to go to Boston. That was the Lilly conference I was telling you about, and that will be rescheduled for May. So we'll talk about that when it comes up again, because maybe even as you're listening to this, Boston is still digging out. But man, the Northeast has been walloped, time and time again with like Syracuse level snow. I lived in Syracuse, New York for a long time where we got 140 plus inches of snow in the winter. And it's just, I shouldn't laugh. It's crazy. But it was great to get just a little bit north of where I live, going to Greensboro, North Carolina, meeting some terrific new people, a fun Type 1 Nation summit there. And I was telling a story that day that I'll tell you here real quick. So my husband and I and my kids, like most people, we are really busy. But I think unlike a lot of type 1 parents, I have been used to asking for help for my kids, for both of my kids, for a long time, because when Benny was diagnosed, right before he turned 2, I worked full time and I was the one with the health insurance, and my husband owned a restaurant. So he had his own business and employed a bunch of people, and our lives were crazy. I would leave my house at 3:00 in the morning to go to work. He wasn't getting home until midnight from work sometimes, even later. So we had a lot of experience with saying, hey, can you watch my kids? Or, we had full-time daycare, but even still, there's a lot of stuff going on. So my kids have been independent, even with type 1, with supervision and that sort of thing for a long time. But when I went to Greensboro, we had a lot of moving parts. My daughter was taking the SAT that day. She's 16, but she doesn't drive yet. She has a lot of friends who do, luckily. And Benny had his first day of ultimate frisbee practice. My husband was out of town that day. It was just a mess. So, I took care of it. I didn't think too much of it until I got to the conference, and a few people reacted with a little bit of shock that I would leave my kids home alone for the day. And they weren't home alone. I mean, you know what I mean. My daughter was with friends who are 16 and 17 years old. They drove her to the SAT, and then they all went out to lunch, and then she came home. My son, I dropped him off at practice. And I got him a ride home. I knew where he would be. It's a very small town anyway. I have several friends who live right near the field and could have gotten him or on. I always tell people if I'm out of town or I'm out the road a bit, hey, Can you be on hot standby? And luckily I have the community that will help me out with that. But a few parents were just jaw-dropped that I let my type 1 13-year-old, I mean, he's old enough, go to a sports practice without me. I think a lot of this does depend on time of diagnosis. I mean, we've been doing this for 11 years. If he's 13 and diagnosed last week or even last year, I probably would feel a bit different. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this at the end of the show. Just add a couple of thoughts on, dropping kids at sports or what to say to coaches, that sort of thing. I know you want to hear the interview with the Libre folks, so I will get right to that. But come back around at the end and I'll talk a little bit more about how I did it. But what do you think? Would you, as a parent, would you leave your 13-year-old at practice? Do you think that was irresponsible of me? As a type 1 adult, if you're listening, am I doing okay with this? Spoiler alert, everything was fine. And I came home and all was good. Like I said, more about that later. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Have you ever tested your blood sugar with a meter and were unsure about the meaning of your result? Take the guesswork out of your numbers with the One Touch Vario Flex meter. It uses Color Sure technology to instantly show you when you or your loved one's blood sugar numbers are low, indicated by blue, in range, green, or high, red, so you can quickly get on with your life. You can also use the meter's Bluetooth smart technology. It's built in to seamlessly sync with the One Touch Reveal mobile app. Available now as a free download for Android devices on Google Play and Apple devices on the App Store. One Touch, because taking a step forward starts with seeing where you are. My guest this week is here to talk about the FreeStyle Libre from Abbott. And if you don't already know, the FreeStyle Libre is a continuous glucose monitoring system. You've got a handheld reader. There is a sensor worn on the back of the arm. And very similar to the Dexcom, it uses a thin, flexible filament, a wire, under the skin to measure your interstitial fluid and measure glucose that way. Unlike the Dexcom, which gives you continuous readings on a visible screen, the Libre is monitoring continuously, but it does not display continuously. You scan it with the reader. They say on their website it is a painless 1-second scan, and it replaces routine finger sticks because it is factory calibrated. Tim Dunn is the principal clinical research manager at Abbott, and he is here to talk about a recent study presented at the Advanced Technologies and Treatments for Diabetes meeting a few weeks back, and I will link up that info in the show notes from the study. The bottom line of that particular study is that A1Cs decreased as scans increased, and these numbers are pretty interesting. The A1Cs went from 8 to 6.7 as scans increased from 4 to 48 per day. There are some differences in how the system has been approved in the U.S. and in Europe. Most significantly, in the U.S., it can only be used for 10 days. There is a 12-hour warm-up, during which time you cannot use the scanner or the reader. Outside the U.S., it is 14 days and a 1-hour warm-up. And we talk about that and a lot more. Here's my interview with Abbott's Tim Dunn. Tim, thanks so much for joining me today. Everybody's really interested in the Libre, and I'm glad you can share some information with us today. Thanks for coming on.
Very happy to be here.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about this latest news that was presented at the Advanced Technologies and Treatments for Diabetes Conference, the ATTD. What did you find out here? Can you give us some of the highlights?
Yeah, so we presented some updated data on the real-world use of the FreeStyle Libre. Last year in 2017 was the first time we showed any data about the system, and that was in a group of about 50,000 of the initial users of the system. And this year in 2018, we had 3 more abstracts accepted for oral presentation, and they expanded on the data set that we analyzed. We're up to 237,000 readers that we were able to analyze, and we looked at some different questions around that. And then we also had analysis around longitudinal use of the system. So people who used it over many sensors, we typically were looking at about 6 months of use. And so those are the main themes that we presented at the conference last month.
The Libre was only recently approved in the U.S. Was that included? Were U.S. people included in this study, or was this already where it was approved, Europe, Australia, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the timing worked out that, no, there was not any U.S. data in this analysis. The abstracts were due back in October, and so our analysis was up through September was the most recent data we had.
Would you say that this data, though, would reflect what you would expect to see in the United States? I mean, are United States Libre users very much different, or can you not say, not really looking at the data yet?
Yeah, I mean, I always be cautious to speculate too much, but, we have been looking at different scanning pattern behaviors, different association with glucose metrics in different countries. That's been a theme we have analyzed. That's one of the few things that we can look at in the de-identified data is the region that the data is coming from. So, for example, we did have some comparisons across European countries published and also presented at the EASD conference last year. And so, generally the observations are very consistent across countries, primarily that people are scanning a lot relative to testing with SMBG, and that there's a very strong association between those who scan more having more glucose levels in range.
I'm sorry, that went by kind of quickly for me. What is SMBG?
Oh, sorry. Self-monitored blood glucose. So my term for traditional fingerstick blood glucose monitoring.
Got it. Okay. All right. So basically the study says, as I'm reading it and translating it here, people like this, they scanned a lot more than you thought they might, and their A1Cs went down. Yeah,
I mean, I think that is a good summary in terms of, people are scanning on average over 13 times per day in this very large group of 237,000 readers across a lot of different countries with different access and different patient populations potentially. And again, yes, as for those who scan more, they have many more glucose level readings in target. So their average glucose is in range. We are looking at the estimated A1C from the average sensor glucose. We don't have the laboratory HbA1c. But then because we have the sensor data, we can also look at excursions above and below target. And so we see for those who scan more, they have less time above target and they have less time below target relative to people who are scanning less often. When you say people were scanning more than 13 times a day, did that surprise you? Did you have any idea how many times you thought they might scan? Yeah, to be honest, it was surprising to me in the sense that when I've been involved here at Abbott for over 12 years and was involved with the design of the system, and we had to speculate, we had to guess and design in the way the system's built in terms of how often people would use it, how much power they would need, how much memory to store all the data. And so we did have an active discussion about trying to guess how many times people would check on average. And I would say we guessed a little bit lower. I would have guessed, if you would have made me write it down 5 years ago, I would have guessed probably about 10. And maybe that was even on the optimistic side. So, so we figured it would be more because we understood the convenience, the value of the information for people. But I think we've been surprised at some level at the number of people who do attend to the glucose a lot of times per day, almost, on average, let's say once per waking hour. But, I think it's also telling us what people need to be successful with their self-care. I don't know if you can answer this because I know you don't live with type 1, so, you may not be able to answer this. There seems to be the people I know who use Libre, there's this initial watch this kind of component, right? They're scanning a bajillion times a day because they want to show people or it's cool for them. It just seems to be, especially if you've never used any kind of CGM, it's this amazing, look, boop, and they do it, 20 times a day. Was there any kind of that factor that you found anecdotally? We do see a little bit of, let's say, early excitement around using the system, maybe in the first day or even week or 2 weeks with the system. But, we do. And some of that longitudinal analysis that we showed at ATTD did show kind of a tapering off in that people at the beginning were scanning even more, but then they would stabilize at a pretty high level again, around 13 to 15 times per day. So, we see all that excitement, and I think that's a natural thing. But on the other hand, it's not going way down. It's still staying at a level that, again, people are, when they're more routine management of their disease, what they need to be successful with it. This group that you are presenting here, is there any way of knowing, did these people use any kind of CGM before this, or were they going directly from finger sticks, or SMBG as you called it, to the
Libre?
So the way that data is collected right now, it's completely separate and de-identified from any of this other information. So we really can't make any firm conclusions or statements about it. I guess what I would say is that the majority of the data is from Europe, and the adoption of CGM in Europe has not been as great in the U.S. for a variety of factors. And so I think it's pretty safe to say that, a vast majority are new to sensors, just because of that fact. I mean, there were not 237,000 CGM users in Europe 2 years ago.
Well, I think that's important as we're looking at these results. This is not, to be clear, this is not a comparison of different kinds of CGM, in other words.
Correct. Yeah. No, it's really an observation of how people are using the FreeStyle Libre system and comparing between different users, primarily along this aspect of how often they're checking their glucose. And then, as I said, we've also been looking at specific countries. The one presentation I had was really focused on Belgium, and specifically because it's unique in that it always had full government reimbursement of the system for all people with type 1 diabetes from the very beginning of its availability. And so it addressed a couple of questions that came up a year ago, which is, are these things you're seeing skewed for, let's say, early adopters or people who have different access to the technology than, let's say, a quote-unquote typical person? And so Belgium, in a nice way, answers or lets us look at that question and say, well, what does the behavior look like in terms of scanning, and what do the relationships look like with scanning and glucose metrics in a place where there should be very equal access to all people interested in it? And the big conclusion was that we saw very similar patterns. We saw slightly lower scanning rates, but nothing dramatic. And we also saw very strong associations, again, between those who scan more having more readings in range.
I don't know if you can answer the kinds of questions that most of my listeners want to know about Libre now, which are, and it's a U.S.-based show, they want to know more about the longer warm-up period in the United States. Is there anything in the works to shorten that? In other words, you put the Libre on. If you're a U.S. user, the FDA approved it that you have to wait 12 hours before you can scan for the first time and really start using that. Is that going to be changed anytime soon? Do you know? Back to Tim in just a moment, and Diabetes Connections is also brought to you by Dexcom. And I will say, yes, this might seem a little awkward as I'm doing a Dexcom commercial during the Abbott Libre interview, but taking my host hat off for a minute, putting my producer hat on, the sponsors of this show know that they are buying commercial time. They are not buying content. I've talked about this before. And while we use the Dexcom system and love it, as you'll hear, I want to make sure I'm bringing you all the stories that I can from our community. And that means all of the different manufacturers. Nobody pays for interview time on this show. The news is the news. The commercials are the commercials. And I have very smart listeners who know the difference. Okay, one of the best things about using the Dexcom G5 mobile CGM system is that share function. As a parent, caregiver, friend, or spouse, you can use a separate Dexcom Follow app and help the person you care about manage diabetes in real time. As a parent, that gives me a lot of peace of mind, even as we, change things up. As Benny gets older, we're giving him more independence. But it's an amazing safety net, and it helps give us all peace of mind. You can use the Dexcom G5 mobile CGM system with iOS or Android now, as long as there is an internet connection. The Dexcom G5 Mobile is the only CGM approved for adults and children ages 2 and older with diabetes. Don't make treatment decisions based upon share and follow readings. Always confirm your compatible smart device or Dexcom receiver. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. And now back to Tim from Abbott, where he is answering my question about possible changes to that 12-hour warm-up time the Libre needs only in the U.S. right now.
We're obviously really committed to advancing the technology all around the world, and especially in the U.S. also. And so we do continue to work with the FDA to understand what data needs to be collected to support these updates to the to the labeling or the indications for use, you would say. And so, yeah, we're actively focused on all of those dimensions.
Are you working toward scanning from a phone? I know that this is available in Europe, right? But not in the United States?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the technology, the underlying technology for the scan process is called near-field communication. And that's been available in certain phones, the Android phones, for a long time, only recently with Apple phones. And so, as you said, there's a different regulatory and commercialization process in different regions. So we have those systems out in Europe, and we're also, again, working with the FDA to pace out the advancements as we can. But there's sort of an order to happen, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. You can't ask for everything at once, so you'll get nothing. So you have to kind of ask as you go. But are you is Abbott planning to ask the FDA for that smartphone stuff this year, next year? Can you give us any kind of hint?
Yeah, in terms of timing, it's really difficult to speculate. It's not something I'm as close to as maybe some of my colleagues either. But, like I said, it's something we're really focused on.
Sure. One of the big reasons why we all want to know this is because I'm a parent of a kid with type 1. I want to see the numbers remotely. Not everybody wants that. I get that. But that's a big sticking point for me. So not having it on the phone means you can't share it. Are people in Europe using this to scan, using their phones? Are they able to then share those numbers with a follower, like can be done with a Dexcom, or is it just one phone?
So there is in Europe, it's not available in the U.S. yet, but in Europe is a separate app, a phone app that is called Libre Link Up. And so it does address exactly that need so that a caregiver can also be transmitted the glucose scan results to be able to remotely be sharing the data.
Got it. And one thing I just thought of, would you mind explaining, if you can, how is it linked to the cell phone? It's not Bluetooth, is it, in Europe?
It's called this near-field communication, so NFC. So it's the same radio, it's called, as what is used for Apple Pay or things like that, or like library books, the readers there, toll things. So, the hardware, the radio exists in phones, but it's only recently been available, for example, in the Apple phone to third-party applications.
Perfect.
So it's called near-field communication. So you're right, it's not Bluetooth.
You did say that, but
energy RFID, yep.
And just to kind of follow up on that and to make it clear, many people refer to the Libre as a flash glucose monitor because obviously it doesn't show you the numbers until you scan it. But in reality, it is measuring all the time, right? It's just not displaying. So when you say it's on cell phones and it can show you what followers can see, it is always measuring the blood glucose or the interstitial fluid. That's right. The sensor is automatically measuring the glucose in the tissue every minute, and then it's automatically storing it every 15 minutes historically. So when you scan it, you get the value right at that minute, and then you get the 8 hours in the past every 15 minutes apart to show you that trend over the time. I know that Abbott has partnered with Bigfoot Biomedical on their system, with their closed loop and other things that they're doing. Are you partnering with anybody else? Is there another, can you share? Are there any other, hybrid closed loop systems or closed loop systems that are going to be using Abbott either in the U.S. or in other countries? You're right. Bigfoot is a key partner for us. We're really excited about what their approach is and some of the focus they have on bringing new technology to patients with diabetes. In terms of other projects, I really can't comment on that in terms of other opportunities that are being evaluated. It's a dynamic field. There's a lot of opportunities out there, but right now the Bigfoot one is really the only one we're discussing today. Sure. So Tim, just a personal question. What is this like for you? I mean, you've been working on this system for a long time. What's it like to have it out in the marketplace now and seeing results like this study that says it's really helping people? It's tremendously gratifying. I mean, I'm humbled by how often people do recognize how much it's helped them. I'm only one part of a very large team. It's kind of staggering to think of the amount of resources and people and effort and
blood, sweat, and tears people put into this product, and there's still more to come. I mean, we still are really committed to expanding the line and manufacturing and being able to really meet the needs that are out there. But I started working on continuous glucose monitors in 1997, so I've been at this a while, and it's really been amazing to see how things have evolved over the past 2 decades, but a lot of pieces have to come together to make it work. And I think, I do feel really great that FreeStyle Libre is helping a lot of people.
I don't know if you can even answer this, but what took so long? What were the challenges? Was it all technology? Was it regulation? That was the big, slowdown.
I would say, the sensor technology is really difficult. It took that long. I mean, the core technology was conceived in the over 20 years ago, but to really get all the pieces right in terms of the cost, the reliability, the stability, the manufacturability, those are really complex problems. And so, I appreciate it can seem frustratingly long, but this is a really substantial advancement. And it doesn't have the same resources behind it as some of the other areas of technology, but it is a really difficult problem. It's both a biological problem in terms of the sensing and the glucose and compatibility with your body, and then it's also a technology problem of having low power capabilities of electronics that are affordable and discrete.
I think that we would all rather hear that it's just really tough to make than that it's tough to distribute. So I appreciate your answer. I wasn't trying to insult you by saying, oh, it's easy, you should have come up with it sooner. But I think there's this perception sometimes that it was ready to go 20 years ago when obviously it was not. So thanks for taking the time to kind of take us through that.
Sure, of course. We're never satisfied either. So, want to reiterate, really excited about the launch of the system across the regions, and especially the U.S., and we look forward to being able to collect and analyze more data from the U.S. and really make sure we see the same types of trends and also explore more into what type of insights we can provide to patients and clinicians to understand the benefits of the system.
Well, Tim, thank you so much. I look forward to learning more about the Libre and finding out more about what kind of technology might be available in the U.S. soon. So keep us posted. Thanks for coming on.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More info about the Libre, about Abbott's plans in the show notes. You can just click on the link and go over there. Look, I'm trying to get some answers, and I know that you want to know more, so I will keep you posted on whatever we find out. It seems to me, just listening between the lines, that they know that the 12-hour is a barrier, and they know that more people in the U.S. would like a longer length of use. So we'll see how it goes, and I will keep you posted. And I'll also link up, there are a few ways that people in our community, of course, have figured out how to hack the Libre. And I hate that word hack, but I'm not quite sure how else to describe it. They've found ways to remote monitor from it. There's additional things you can put on it. Some of this is from the Night Scout people, CGM in the cloud. I will link all of that up so you can check it out for yourself. In our Community Connection segment this week, a look at how one university is handling type 1 diabetes and food. Now, I don't know about you, but when I went to college, eating at the dining hall was a challenge. I mean, just trying not to overeat the junk food, right? We're trying to make good choices like salad over macaroni and cheese. That isn't something that college students are really known for. But at North Carolina State University, they're trying to make it easier for students with diabetes. And part of the reason why they're having success, the two people I'm talking to, Lisa Eberhart, a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. She's NC State's Dining's Director of Nutrition and Wellness, and the dining hall manager has type 1 diabetes herself, Jaelyn Phelps, and she saw the need to really make a change. Here's my interview with Lisa Eberhart and Jaelyn Phelps. Lisa, let me start with you, because it seems like this is a pretty unique program. Can you tell me a little bit, before we get to what you're doing, with diabetes and everything else and dietary needs, what are some of the challenges of feeding kids in college?
Well, adults, they're pretty much adults by the time they get to college. And but there are some challenges because they're at that time in their life where they're taking lots of risks. And if you have diabetes or if you have some sort of food allergy. It's kind of a risky time in their lives. So we try to make sure that we have support in place for students with allergies or students that have diabetes or any dietary need. It doesn't have to be allergies or diabetes. And then also just the volume is a challenge. We serve 30,000 meals a day, and I tell my staff that that's 30,000 chances to make a mistake. And so we want to make sure that we put out accurate information and we train people to serve food safely. Those are probably the biggest challenges.
I'm curious, though, when you say risk, college young adults are taking more risks. When you're talking specifically about eating, I think of, as you said, the portion control, because I know from my college experience 100 years ago, suddenly you had all these choices. You had almost unlimited. We had the card. It wasn't even like real money. And most of us overate. Is that what you're talking about? Or when you say risky behavior, is it kids with, or students with allergies who are trying things that maybe they know aren't great for them?
Well, I'm saying they might ignore signs that say this contains nuts or whatever their allergy is. Or in people with diabetes, I've worked with students with diabetes for 20 years. I'm a diabetes educator, and sometimes their parents have managed their diabetes, and they don't have real clear understanding of if they're trying to carbohydrate count and how they're going to cover that with insulin. I mean, they might go long periods of time without eating and going ahead and taking their insulin. They may exercise more than usual or a lot less than usual and not keep track of what their blood sugars are doing.
Got it. All right, so let's bring Jaelyn Phelps on now, and you are a manager at one of the dining halls there at NC State. But more than that, you have type 1 diabetes. What was your experience like when you got to college? Was it, as Lisa has kind of mentioned here, a whole new world of food?
I guess I wouldn't say it's like a whole new world of food per se, but the difference between when I went to college and some of the students that I'm meeting here at NC State is that I had a really strong network of other type 1s that I had grown up with. I was involved with a diabetes camp for a number of years and even went on to be a counselor and then the assistant director of Camp Comanche in Dayton, Ohio. So because of that, I had such good friends. And if something happened, like for instance, my roommate in college turned up the refrigerator temperature and all of my Humalog and Novolog froze.
Oh.
And when that happened, I had no idea what to do. And I was still refilling my prescriptions at home because I didn't have a car and there was no pharmacy that was really close. And I had no experience and I didn't know what to do. And of course, I discovered this like after my endocrinologist's office was closed. But it turns out like when you have friends that are nurses or people that you've grown up with that have experienced these things, it's really easy to reach out to them and be like, have you experienced this before? How did you handle it? Is this okay to use? Those types of things. So I wanted to make sure that students at NC State have the same resources that I did.
So, and how did this all come about, what you're trying to do at NC State? And Lisa, let me start with you, even though I'm sure this is more of a team effort here. But, some of the unique things that you're doing, when did you decide not only there's a need for this, but we can make a difference?
I think a lot of it was Jaelyn. Students would come up to her and notice her pump and say, oh, I have type 1 diabetes too. And then they would end up talking about strategies on how to navigate the campus safely. And that gave me the idea that we're trying to make this campus very inclusive. We mark everything for allergies, everything for vegans and vegetarians. We have calories and carbohydrates and nutrition analysis of every menu item everywhere on campus. We mark things for pork for our students that practice a diet of halal. But we weren't doing that much to actually make people with type 1 diabetes feel comfortable on campus, give them that support they needed. So we worked with student health for a little while, but they had kind of a different, more clinical approach, and we are looking for a more community-inclusive approach. So Jaelyn took that on, and she kind of modeled it after what we were doing for allergies to make sure that students that had any special dietary need felt comfortable on campus, including students with type 1 diabetes.
Well, Jaelyn, talk about that, because apparently lots of people saw your pump. And just like you had your community around you, it had to have made those students feel better to just to be able to talk to you. And what gave you the idea then to really go ahead and make this difference at the dining halls?
It was one of the things where one of the students said, man, I'm hearing their stories, I guess, really is what said we need to do more, because some of these people that I've met have been diagnosed within the last 2 years, and some of them are juniors and seniors in college, and they've never met anyone else with type 1, which blows my mind. I can't even imagine growing up, let alone being diagnosed so late in life, and then not having the resources that I once had. And so I really wanted to be there for them, and then also connect them with other people that had type 1.
Okay, so tell me what you are doing. What's different now than before you started the program? And Jaelyn, let me start with you. What's different now?
Well, we're definitely having much more events, and some of those events involve both the allergy group and the diabetes group, which works out because some of our diabetics have celiacs. And so there's a lot of communication there, and they're able to make friends with the allergy community as well. And not only that, but we're just trying to have more consistent meetings and just let people know that we exist, and there are type 1s on campus that want to get together.
One of the quotes that was in the article that I found that I thought was very interesting is all about the student who said, "No offense, but I don't want to talk diabetes with doctors. I want to talk to my peers." As someone who lives with type 1, that really resonated with you, I assume.
Oh my gosh, it spoke to me so much, because the event that we were at, it was okay, but it really made me feel uncomfortable, because when you walk in, there's someone at a podium and they gave away Sharps containers, and I felt so...
Everybody wants one of those.
I felt so strong, and I was like, no, this is not at all what I imagined this group to be. And that's when I knew that this wasn't a group that needed to necessarily be run through student health, that this is something more social, that I wanted to make sure that people on a community level and on a social level could meet and get together and talk about things, and not just hear from a doctor or a dietitian's perspective what they should or shouldn't be doing.
And Lisa, let me ask you about that, because as a CDE and as a dietitian, I'll say this. It seems to me that as a CDE and a registered dietitian, you're in a different environment. I mean, many people with those certifications and degrees don't really step foot in a, quote, real-world situation. But as a college dining director of nutrition and wellness, you're kind of in that world, seeing people eat real food and living real lives every day. Does that make a difference for you?
Yeah, I think all good CDs have at least one foot in real life. And I think that Jaelyn was just right on point. When students, they want to hear from their peers about things. That's who they value the opinions of. And as long as their peers are giving them good advice and kind of mentored by someone like Jaelyn, it's a really safe environment. We keep saying community, but it's very much more of a community approach. These are students that have a similar challenge, and they want to work with other people that have that similar challenge. Plus, students at NC State are really, really intelligent. It's very hard to get into NC State, and they're very analytical. We're a STEM school, and they want to do things in a smart way, but they don't want to be lectured to at all. And they just need some life experience, and if they can get that guidance from other people, especially their peers, then I think it's a more positive approach to managing their diabetes.
Do you think, Lisa, this is a model for other colleges? Have you heard from other universities or colleges that have reached out, or can you see this going to become a more national program?
Yes, I can. I think that Jaelyn has done a wonderful job of trying to start this program. It's a lot of work, though, and she's pretty much doing it on her own time. I mean, dining is very supportive, but she has another job that she's doing for 40 hours a week. So you have to be passionate about something to really make something great, and she has a lot of passion, and that's the key to a really great program. And then I think, passion is contagious. So the students that she works with develop that same passion.
Jaelyn, what's it like to hear those words said about you? That's pretty cool.
Wow. No, I mean, it makes me feel really good. And, you know, I kind of got a lump in my throat. It made me feel so good. So, Lisa.
Jaelyn, do you think this is something that could go national? Have you heard from other colleges?
I haven't heard from other colleges yet, but I found out I am presenting at NACUF's National on the types of things like the Blue Zone Dinner and these groups that we have here in NC State. So maybe in the future.
What conference is that, just so I'm clear?
The NACUF's National, so the National Association for College and University Food Service.
Oh, okay, great. Hey, before I let you go, though, I hesitate to ask this question, but as long as I have you here, you mentioned, Lisa, at the beginning that, you know, some students go to college with their parents still managing all their diabetes stuff and what they eat. What's your advice to nervous parents? I'm laughing because I'm going to be one of them, to prepare their students with type 1 for college.
I think that nervous parents, which are all parents, I think, need to make sure that that the school actually knows what's in the food they're serving. That's the number one thing. Can they give you some sort of nutrition analysis of the food? Because if everyone carbohydrate counts now, and your student needs to have an idea of what's in their food in order to make a educated guess on the insulin dosage, and then make sure they have a dietitian, a registered dietitian, and better than that, a registered dietitian that's also a diabetes educator on the dining staff, not just in student health. And if you have those things, you know that university has some stake in making sure that your student is going to be safe. And the other thing I would tell all parents, and I've told a lot of parents because I've been doing this for a long time, is let the student manage their diabetes towards the end of their high school. I mean, pretty much completely manage their diabetes because they're going to have to do it. And who wants to start the day you move into college, which is a really stressful day for the student, no matter how excited they are. And if they start managing their diabetes themselves at 16 or whatever, then at 18 they are ready to take on the task of managing their whole life, which is difficult, and their diabetes at the same time while they're in college. And also I would set them up with somebody who knows something. Like when they get to campus, I would ask, is there some sort of diabetes network here on campus that you can hook your child up with? Although it's been our experience that students don't really like to make a big deal of their diabetes. It's a private thing. And so that's why the community approach works a little bit better, the more peer-to-peer, yeah, I have diabetes, yeah, so do I type thing, rather than I've just gathered all you type 1s here together to lecture you on ways you can be safe on campus. I think that never works.
Yeah. And here's a Sharps container, which is necessary, but I understand. Jaelyn, what would your advice be to students, you know, who are coming in and perhaps, I know we've got the nervous parents, but you've got the excited student who maybe, you know, would like to talk about their type 1, but doesn't want to run around announcing it and wearing a big name tag?
I think my number one advice and what I would have done different is, Lisa's 100% right. I was very hidden about my diabetes, and I never really told anyone. And back then I had a pump that I was able to put inside my, you know, waist belt, and people wouldn't be able to notice that I had it. But now that I have the Omnipod, you can clearly see it. I wear it a lot on my arms. And I would say take every question and every stupid comment that you get, because we all know that you get them. Oh, well, how fat did you used to be? And, oh, you can't eat that.
Oh, God.
Oh, I mean, I could say literally 100 different things that are upsetting that people say, but take it as a learning opportunity to educate someone, because you could really change their perspective and they could one day, you know, save your life. So especially your friends, it's really important.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this. I hope to stay in touch. And I'll tell you what, my 16-year-old who's a junior has NC State on her list. So if we come to the campus, I'll give you guys a shout out. Thank you so much for joining me. Always nice to have a local connection like that. You know, NC State right up the road here. And as I mentioned, one of my daughter's possible college choices. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. Will it spread around the country? Will I get more traction on it? But very cool stuff. In this week's Know Better segment, let's talk about Medtronic's announcement that they have a standalone CGM now. What does that mean? Who's it for? We'll talk about it. Know Better is brought to you by Know Better Foods. Know Foods is the leading provider of grain-free food products. They help health-conscious consumers achieve diet and fitness goals by producing delicious, nutritionally superior, natural, non-GMO, grain, gluten-free, and low glycemic index alternatives to traditional grain-based foods. You can get everything from bread mix and pasta, donuts, muffins, waffles, and pancake mix and cookies. Know Better is delicious. They have a really yummy looking Instagram account. If you don't follow them, you should really get over there because they put out the most gorgeous food pictures and give you really good ideas about how to use the products in unique ways. So, like the macaroni and cheese buns that they made, you got to see it to believe it. It's pretty cool stuff. As always, you can use the promo code Stacey10 to save on any purchase. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Know Foods logo to learn more. Just last week, Medtronic announced that it has received FDA approval for its Guardian Connect system. So what is this? It is a standalone continuous glucose monitor from Medtronic. And apparently, they've been working on this for 2 years to get it approved in the U.S. It's been available overseas, I think, since 2016. So what is this? What does this mean for you? Basically, the Guardian 3 sensor is the one used with the MiniMed 670G hybrid closed loop system. You may have heard all about this. The Guardian 3 is a big improvement in terms of accuracy from their previous sensors, but it's only been able in the US to be used with the 670G. They haven't been selling it separately. You can't get it separately. Think about, we just talked about the Libre. We've talked about the Dexcom. Those are CGMs that you can use with any system. I mean, you can use them with Medtronic. You can use them by themselves for just pens or shots. You don't have to use them with another system in order to see the readings, right? But you did have to do that with the Guardian 3 sensor. You could not use it by itself. Now you can. Interesting thing about this is that it does not need a receiver. And a lot of people are saying this is probably why it took 2 years to get approved here, because, most people now with the Dexcom G5 don't use a receiver, although you may have it, you use your phone, but it's not approved as a standalone with just the phone. So if you're seeing a lot of firsts from Medtronic, that's what this is all about. They're calling it a smart CGM. It needs a smartphone and a mobile app to function, which is really interesting when you think about some of the limitations the FDA and Medicare have put on diabetes tech. And I'm sorry, if I'm shorthanding this, if this is your first time listening, I will link up a lot of information. This is not going to be a deep dive into all of those issues, but I will link it up so you can learn more. But basically, getting stuff on phone only and then getting it approved to be used on phone only has been a huge sticking point in the last couple of years. So this is a big step that way. I'm going to link up a terrific article from DiabetesMine where they go through this in depth, and you'll see, what's different about this, what's the same about this, and it should start shipping in the middle of this year. And one more quick clarification. When I say you can use the different CGMs with different pumps, there are certainly pumps that go with and have made partnerships with different CGMs so you can see the value on the screen, and that ultimately down the road they will be linked together for closed loops or hybrid closed loops. So when I say it's not connected, I mean you can use it separately. But when you think about it, obviously Medtronic has its pumps that want to use this. Dexcom has paired off with the T-Slim and with the Bionic Pancreas at Damiano's project, the iLet, and Bigfoot has paired off with Abbott. So when we say paired together and you can use it separately, it can be a little bit confusing. And I should also note, this system will not connect with Medtronic pumps right now. This is standalone, so it's not going to connect with any MiniMed insulin pumps. They are working to develop it for the 630 and 670G devices, but there's no timeline for that at all. And it will not connect or display on other Medtronic pumps. So we'll keep you posted about that. But interesting news as we hear lots of good stuff possibly coming in the next couple of weeks and months on the CGM market. So stay tuned. And now you know better. At the beginning of the show, I talked a little bit about, leaving my kids alone for a bit of a day when I went to a JDRF summit, and the little raised eyebrow I got for doing that. Now, trust me, my kids are safe. I would never do anything to put them in danger, but I do believe in a lot of independence, and maybe more than some people. So, but I want to explain a little bit about how I did that with Benny, because we've really developed a system over a long period of time. He's been playing sports and doing activities, since he was diagnosed. I mean, what sports does a 2-year-old play? But, he did stuff. And most of the time I stayed. Most of the time for practices and games, for all that stuff, little kids soccer, birthday parties, when you need to be there as a type 1 parent. But over the years, we have found ourselves explaining less and leaving him more, which I think is pretty natural. So whereas in the past, I would call a coach before the season started and give him a quick rundown and maybe even a printout or two. I have been known to bring my action plan sheets, which I actually highly recommend you make if you've got a little kid and you're leaving them with other caretakers, basically an if this, then that. But that's maybe more detail for another time. But now, I just don't see the need. Benny can speak up. He's very vocal. I mean, maybe if you have a very shy kid, but he is not at all, embarrassed to say, I need to take a break. I need to check my blood sugar, whatever. So I texted the coach the day before the practice and said, I don't even know if Benny has type 1. He's very responsible. He knows what he's doing. But if you have any questions, call me. Obviously, here's my cell phone, that sort of thing. My philosophy is that if there is an emergency of any kind, if a child breaks their leg at practice, right? If someone has an asthma attack, a coach is going to do the same thing. They're going to call a parent. They're going to call for emergency help. They're going to call EMS, whatever they would do. It's the same thing, because what's the worst that's going to happen to Benny, right? Maybe he'll pass out from a low. Do you think that the coach is going to really take the glucagon out of the kit and use it? I don't. Maybe they will. I mean, I'll tell them it's there. Maybe they'll be a hero. But a lot of the studies I've seen say that that's a long shot. That even parents, like me, panic and don't do it right. So I always tell them, just call me. If someone passes out for any reason, what would you do? You'd call for EMS, right? You'd call 911. Do the same thing. Knock on wood. I'm knocking on everything I've got. We've never even gotten close to that situation. So it's my job to make sure that Benny has what he needs. I know he's 13, but he's a doofus, and I make sure he's got what he needs in that bag. Low treatment, glucagon, whatever he needs. So when he goes to the practice, he can just do the sport. Well, the coach texted me later that day and said, I knew everything had gone fine because Benny was home. I was in touch with him all day. The coach texted me and said, hey, I'm glad you gave me a heads up about the diabetes because I didn't know. But Benny came right up to me at the beginning of practice and told me about it. Apparently, he said, hey, I have type 1. Here's my pump. I may need to stop. I was blown away. And he said, if I stop making sense, tell me to drink some juice. I'll drink my Gatorade. And if I tell you I don't want my Gatorade or I won't drink the juice, call my mom, because then I really need some help. And they kind of laughed about it. And knock on wood again, that's never happened. But I have never told him to say that. And I was really excited to hear that he felt comfortable enough to do that. Now, I don't know how many 13-year-old boys you know. I knew that I couldn't say to him, great job, Benny. I'm so proud that you said the right thing. But I did tell him, hey, thanks for talking to the coach. I really appreciate that. And he gave me a grunt, and we moved on. But I'll take that as feedback that he has been listening over the years, and that's good news. But I already did know that he could handle himself, and I felt comfortable leaving him. Was I nervous? Of course. Look, I worry every day about that kid. I worry every day about my 16-year-old. I worry about her driving and her friends driving. I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit more worried about them tooling around, 16, 17-year-old kids, even in daytime, going out to lunch, than I did about Benny. That's a story for another time, I guess, all the driving and the worries I have right now, and her getting her license probably in the next 2 months. But my point is, for the people who saw me at the summit and thought I was crazy, I'm not. You can do this. It really is okay. Make sure you have your safety nets in place. You know, I have a picture that I show at presentations, and it's Benny about age 4, and he's jumping off a boat, and he's got his arms out, and he is flying. He's way out in the air. It's a great picture, but he's got his life preserver on. And I'm right there. I'm not in the picture, but I'm right behind him. And that's kind of our philosophy of diabetes, right? Go and do. Be safe. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe, but I'm also going to let you jump. I'm going to try to let you fly. Is that a bit of an exaggeration for an ultimate frisbee practice? Sure. But it just fits in our overall philosophy. And I hope that helps you in some way. You know, I'm a mom. I'm never going to stop worrying. But we can't let our worry turn into their fear or let it hold them back. Okay, where am I heading out in the next couple of weeks? We've got some family stuff going on. My kid's spring break is here, and I'm actually going to be doing an interview soon with Lily. So watch out for that on social media. I think that's actually happening over my kid's spring break, but we'll do it. And when that happens, I will be asking on social media. I'd love your questions. This is an interview about the price of insulin. So watch the Facebook page, join the Facebook group. It is Diabetes Connections, the group. Love to have you come and play in that sandbox. It's a really nice group and it's growing beautifully. So come on in, but watch that space. And then, our local walk is in April. I just got called to be on the local news, which will be a lot of fun. Although my friend Wilson, who does these morning live shots, I got to be there at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So I'll let you know when that's happening. That's in mid-April. Doing my hair, putting on lipstick that early again. And then later in the month in April, I'll be going to Orlando for their Touched by Type 1 conference. Then we're going to try this Boston conference again for the Lilly Technology in early May. And then we have a big event in Charlotte. Riding on Insulin is joining up with JDRF to do a one challenge, they're calling it. We have a whitewater center here that is just amazing, with, canoeing, whitewater, and rock climbing, rope challenges. So if you're anywhere near the Carolinas, you might want to drive in for the day or even make it a weekend. It's going to be an awesome and unique event. Okay. Thanks to my editor, John Buchanan's Audio Editing Solutions, who is a magician and puts all this stuff together for me every week. Thank you, John. Thank you for listening. I'm glad you're here every week. Hey, tell a friend about the show. If you know somebody who's touched by type 1, just send him an email, text him the show, whatever is easy. I'd love to spread the word and hear more great stories from our community. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.